With Jujutsu Kaisen Season 3 now well on its way, I think it's finally time I talk about one of my favorite abilities from the show, that being Aoi Todo's Boogie Woogie. How would Izuku Midoriya, one of the most tactical fighters in the world of MHA, be able to use this technique to become a pro hero? Well, you'll find out the story here today. If you guys enjoy this narrative and you want to hear more from this story and more, you could hit some of those cool red and bell-shaped buttons down there. See what happens. Maybe I'll come back in your feed sometime. Anyway, let's get right into the story for What If Izuku Midoriya Had Aoi Todo's Power, Boogie Woogie.
It was like I was drowning, and no one was coming to save me. After all this time, after everything Kachan said, maybe I should have just taken a swan dive like he told me to. I can't breathe. Someone please save me. In an instant, I was out of my own head, and I could breathe again. As my eyes cleared and I looked forward, I saw him standing there. He wore a purple shirt, and his muscles bulged beneath it. His hair was in a style I'd never seen before. Could this be a pro hero? How was that? With a single punch, black sparks would fly off his body, and this slime-like villain that had tried to take over my body, he would go flying to the wall. He had a long scar running down the side of his face, but his eyes, they were definitely kind. And his next words were,
Hey there, man. What's your name?
It's Izuku Midoriya.
Alright then. I just got one question for you. What kind of woman is your type?
Well, that's...
Come on, spit it out already. You're killing me here. Izuku's face would blush a deep red.
Well, if I had to say so, I would say I like tall girls with a nice big ass, just like Jennifer Lawrence. At my words that had come sputtering out of me from a place I didn't know where, his eyes would light up and tears begin to flow from them. Mister, what's your name? I didn't get the chance to ask you. Oh, and thank you so much again for saving me.
Deku would bow to the man, but instead, what he would receive instead of a name is a clap on his shoulder. My brother, you truly are one of a kind. Izuku would look up. At these words, the man had vanished.
Hello? Where did you...
In the next moment, a crash could be heard outside, and the road would rumble. The next thing Izuku would see would overwhelm him.
Is that... All Might?
It was unmistakable. Izuku had seen this man play on his monitor every night for years. His golden locks would shake, shimmering in the light, passing underneath the bridge. In this underpass, where Izuku had been attacked by that villain and then saved, he would come to meet All Might for the very first time.
There's no need to fear anymore, because I am here.
With a "her" and a grin, All Might would walk over to see Izuku, who had fallen back on his butt onto the ground. His eyes would turn upon the sludge villain who was still knocked out from the attack Izuku had saw earlier, the black sparks that had flown from his fist. As Izuku would stand wobbly, All Might would turn to him.
Young man, did you take care of this villain?
I could never, sir. All Might. Wow. No, there was someone else who came by. I thought he was a pro hero, but I guess he did have a student uniform on.
Ha ha ha. Well, if he ever comes by, tell him he did some good work. That villain was no pushover. Well then, I'll take care of this guy and get out of here.
And with that, All Might would pull out his legendary capture device, a 2-liter of Coca-Cola. Not sponsored, by the way. But I'm willing to be. Anyway, All Might would grab the sludge villain and begin scooping him into bottles. I'm sure that can't be painful to have all your separate parts separated into separate bottles. Right, human rights are just a suggestion. Anyway, moving away from the gross and mortal complications of All Might's capture, All Might would leap to run away, but before he could, Izuku, just like in canon, would leap onto his leg, realizing as he had done so that he had a question, a very important one that he wanted to ask All Might. As All Might would go flying through the air, the bottles in his side pockets of his cargo pants would fly to the road below, where a certain punk with blonde hair and his friends would come into contact with it. As the two would land on the rooftop, All Might would turn, prepared to shout at this kid. Izuku would look ashamed for only a moment, but then he'd turn, looking to All Might, determination stealing in his eyes.
The truth is, I'm quirkless, and I never will have a power that can match yours, but I have to ask, is there any way that I could become a pro hero? A hero like you?
But before everything could be finished, All Might would begin to poof into smoke. As he had just said, "Well, there's no real way for you to..." He turned down into the husk of a man he once was, turning into the shell and skeleton like All Might. Izuku would fall over.
All Might, are you really All Might?
Bringing us to the original conversation they had in canon, where All Might turned Izuku down, saying there's no way he could become a hero ever, pretty much shattering all his hopes and dreams. And with that, his time would finally be up, with All Might now turning back to his full buff form and leaping off to the police station, not realizing that his captured villain had fallen out during their high-rise adventure. Izuku, on the other hand, would be crushed. As he begins walking home back to the pathway he had originally been taking, he'd remember.
Oh, yeah, I never got a chance to thank that other guy.
As Izuku thought these words, he'd hear screams and an explosion.
Everyone get away!
With the explosion ripping into the air, Izuku would turn to see what the commotion was all about. What's going on? As he'd run forward toward the crowd, he'd see that there was firefighters, police officers, and even pro heroes on the sidelines. And at the center of it all, he'd see the friend he had known for a long time. His harshest, but also the one he chased after the most. The blonde-haired Katsuki Bakugo, Kacchan, being attacked by the sludge villain, the same villain that had almost gotten him earlier, before that guy with the braids had shown up and saved him. Izuku's body would move without him even thinking. He didn't care that he was quirkless. He didn't care that he was weak. He saw his best friend, Kacchan, was dying. And he wasn't just gonna stand there and watch. Not like everyone else. His legs would move before he could even think, as he ran forward past the crowd into the destruction. The pro heroes would shout, saying, "Hey kid, be careful!" telling him to get back. But as he approached, something like an instinct would roar inside him. A spark of blue light would ignite in his own mind, and he couldn't help but bring his hands together to meet this instinct. Izuku would clap his hands, activating Boogie Woogie for the first time. Its name had ignited inside him. It was like it had always been there, something that he had just been waiting to uncover. But he never felt like this before. As energy filled his entire body, at the moment he clapped, he'd be staring at one of the fire extinguishers from the firemen behind Bakugo on the other side of the destruction. And as he stared back at Kacchan, the two would switch. Almost instantly upon activating Boogie Woogie, the fire extinguisher would explode inside the sludge villain, causing it to begin coughing as it falls backward, wondering what happened, thinking he had such a tight grip on that kid, the one with that unusual explosive quirk. The sludge villain's vision would change, now again noticing this green-haired brat. Wait, it was the same kid from earlier. Was that his quirk? That's how he escaped. So he must have been the one to knock me out last time too, before I got captured in those plastic bottles. I'll take you out here and now. And with that, he'd throw the remains of the fire extinguisher towards Izuku. Once again, Izuku would clap. The shrapnel of the fire extinguisher, which were going to barrel into Izuku's flesh, would switch with him. As they'd slam into the ground, Izuku would get pushed backward, the momentum of the fire extinguisher following him as he'd skid back on his gym shoes, killing the momentum. There'd be steam coming off the rubber from how fast he'd been moving. Bakugo would finally have come to his senses as his eyes would widen. Izuku? How did you? The sludge villain would roar again, now moving quickly as it began to attack at Izuku with its long arms. It would smash down in the shape of a club, But Izuku would use Boogie Woogie, swapping with the sludge villain as their positions would change. Immediately, the sludge villain would be confused and disorientated. As if on cue, All Might would arrive, appearing at the scene having seen Izuku's power and the way he had saved that young man.
Young man, I take back every word I said.
He'd throw a punch back as he tightened his arm, throwing a huge wave of power that would cause the weather to change and completely destroying the sludge villain once again into parts where he could recapture him.
You too can become a hero.
Izuku would fall over. How had this happened? Tears began welling up in his eyes as he looked down at his own hands. He could feel it, the power inside of him that had awoken. What was this? This Boogie Woogie, it was amazing. But all that Bakugo could feel watching from the sidelines is contempt.
You bastard!
The pro heroes would be trying to load him up into an ambulance to get him checked out.
You damn Deku! You lied to me! You always pretended to be weak!
Kachan,
Screw you!
The doors would shut as the pro heroes would then swell around Izuku.
That was incredibly dangerous, but wow, what a phenomenal quirk!
So you can just switch people and items? It's like some kind of incredible short-range teleportation quirk.
Yes, those are really rare.
What's your name?
Are you planning to become a pro hero one day?
This is way too many questions. I'm sorry. Izuku would clasp his hands once again, teleporting out of the crowd and running off towards his house, with all the reporters cheering and wondering who this new, sudden vigilante was. This student and potential pro hero in the future. All Might would suddenly be in the middle of the crowd, turning and watching as the young man ran away.
But he said he was quirkless,
he'd think. With this, All Might would make up his mind. A few minutes later, after getting away from the reporters and everything being wrapped up, he'd find the young man, standing in front of him once again in his smaller form, now debuffed in his regular, non-Small Might form. He'd say,
"Young man, I changed my mind from what I said earlier. You too can definitely become a hero."
Izuku, hearing the words from All Might, would fall to his knees.
I can become a hero?
Yeah, of course you can. Why didn't you say you had such an incredible power like that? Were you just trying to mess with me or something? Well, I saw what you did. Why did you go save your friend back there? He didn't seem too friendly to you.
Izuku would quickly correct All Might's misnomer.
No, All Might. It's not well, I thought I was quirkless. Well, it's hard to explain, but I wasn't lying to you earlier. I swear. And that was my friend. I just couldn't watch him standing there. I had to do something, and before I realized it, my legs moved on their own.
There are tales from many heroes about how they became great. But one thing common among almost all of them is that their bodies moved before they could think, before they could react. You did a great thing today, young man. Now tell me, what is your name?
It's Izuku Midoriya.
Well then, Izuku Midoriya, I have an offer I want to propose to you. The truth behind my power is that it can be passed on.
Izuku would watch as All Might holds his hand out in front of him, the rainbow energy we saw from that episode beginning to swirl.
The power of one for all. A quirk that gets passed on to other people to become stronger. And from what I've seen today, you've got exactly what it takes to become the next greatest hero of all time.
And with that, things would begin to align. Izuku would accept All Might's offer, not yet fully understanding the complete capability of his Boogie Woogie, or what it actually was or entailed. But to be able to inherit All Might's power? Was he really worthy of such an honor? That was something he could only think to himself. But he would accept All Might's offer. He wanted to become great. He wanted to be strong. And he wanted to save people. And for some reason, he also had a weird complex growing about why he needed to have an idol he was obsessed with. But that will come later. With this, Izuku's training would begin. Just like in canon, for the next 8 months, he would be training with All Might at the beach, working to increase his physical strength. All Might would forbid him from using Boogie Woogie to move anything on the beach, having him use his own strength. Before summer could really hit, he had his own problems at school. While he was training for the UA entrance exams, getting as much physical training as he could, Kacchan had completely stopped talking to him, practically ignoring him. He was being far colder than he had ever been before, giving Deku a cold stare every time he saw him, ignoring him or brushing past and banging into his shoulder in the hallway. It went from harassing him and hitting his stuff to completely ignoring him. Izuku didn't even know what was worse, but for now he couldn't care. What he needed to do now was get strong enough to beat the entrance exam and get into UA High. That was his goal. Eventually the day would come. He'd have cleaned the entire beach using his own hands, and when All Might would grab a piece of his hair to feed to Izuku, Izuku would have a question into his mind.
Wait a minute. If quirks can be passed on, did that guy give me his quirk? Is that how I awaken this power?
But before he could linger on that, All Might would stuff the hair down his throat. Yeah, that's as bad as it sounds. With Izuku now gaining one for all, before heading off to the UA entrance exams. The test portion being easy for Izuku, who was naturally studious and could pass all of these questions without even blinking an eye. Then, the time would finally come. The practical exam, where everyone could show what they've got. Izuku would tighten his fist, gulping.
All Might had said it would take a few hours for this to kick in. I should be ready to go now. I should be able to use his power too.
But unlike Boogie Woogie, where the strength had manifested into his mind, all that All Might had said was that he needed to tighten his buttocks and yell out with all of his heart, whatever that meant. He was kind of hoping it would come to him in a moment of battle, just like Boogie Woogie had. During the 8 months of training, outside of his training of All Might, he had been practicing with his ability, his inherited ability from that strange man, the one who had apparently approved of his type, whatever that meant. During the day and when he was at home, he'd use Boogie Woogie to switch himself with mundane objects. He'd even begun thinking of different techniques using the properties of the momentum transfer that he remembered from the sludge villain fight, though he hadn't actually used any of those yet. It'd be pretty difficult since he didn't have to actually fight anyone. With present Mike announcing the buzzer and START! Everyone would leap into action. Namely, Tenya Ito would be at the front, his incredible speed leading the pack. Izuku would simply smile though.
That's exactly what I've been waiting for.
With a clap of Boogie Woogie, he would teleport, switching with Ida. Ida would be back at the start, like he had never left while everyone else was now in the ring. Sorry, Izuku would call out as he began running after the robots himself. Ida would be slightly infuriated, but Izuku had gotten him back for his comment at the start, wondering if he really was capable of being here at this event. Izuku would run down the streets looking for robots. There was only one method he could use right now without relying on All Might's power yet, since he didn't know how it would work. Izuku took 2 robots and got them to chase him. With one attacking him, he'd switch himself with another robot, the 2 robots beginning to basically fight each other, with their blows being transferred to the other one, with Izuku using Boogie Woogie to teleport between himself and the other 2 robots. The announcers and those watching the exams would be impressed with his ingenuity, seeing how he's taking such a tactile quirk and using it for combat. "Oh, I recognize him," Nezu would say. He'd stand up, putting his hand in his fist. "I heard about him from that incident with All Might last year, about a student who had a teleportation quirk. How marvelous that he's attending our school. I'm sure he'll do great things." The rest of the teachers would nod too, the only one who would simply not respond being Aizawa, who would frown, though no one else knew why. Using this method, Izuku had actually racked up a fair amount of points. He wasn't doing bad, and he hadn't had to use one for all yet either, though he really did want to try it out. When the 0-pointer would be announced, that was when things went all haywire. Most of the small robots in the area had been destroyed already, and Izuku had to find more quickly. As he turned to run following the other students, he'd hear a girl shout out in pain.
Isn't that...
He'd remember her. That nice girl from before the exam started, who had caught him when he almost tripped when he was nervous. This time, Izuku had the perfect ability to save her. Izuku would look around, desperate for anything, rubble, something small enough that he could teleport using Boogie Woogie with. But there would be nothing. As the foot of the giant robot would come down, Izuku would grit his teeth. There's only one thing I can do now. He'd clasp his hands together, activating his technique, Boogie Woogie, and swapping himself with the girl. She'd realize being disorientated as her face would turn, seeing Izuku now stuck in the rubble. But he wouldn't look afraid. No. He'd turn up, looking at the robot's foot coming down to crush him, as his eyes would fill with determination. She'd scream out saying, "No, watch out!" But his fist would fill with light. As he began to pull his arm back, he'd begin to scream out from the bottom of his heart. And for that instant, the same energy he felt when he activated Boogie Woogie, this power would channel through him. That and something else. His veins filled with power and energy. As he threw a punch, he'd leap into the air, his knees shattering the rubble around him as his fist would ram into the giant robot's foot. He'd rip through it as black sparks would ignite from across his arm into the robot, causing a massive destruction, basically ripping the entire robot in half. Izuku would have used his first ever time using One for All. He would have activated a black flash. It was at this moment that Izuku could finally see it. This blue energy hovering around him. What was it? He felt like he had finally begun to understand. As the sparks of black covered the robot, One for All's strength would rip through his arm and his legs. The 0-pointer would fall backwards. The two halves of the robot crashing into the ground would be completely burnt out from the black flash combined with One for All. As Izuku began to flail his arms and legs, he'd wonder what he could do to save himself. There! Some of the rubble that had been solid pieces of road before had been shattered into smaller pieces, small enough that he could use Boogie Woogie on them. As he turned his hands to try and clasp them together, he'd realize that his other arm, the arm where he had used One for All, he couldn't even feel it. Oh gosh, no. Then I'll have to. He'd pull his fist back, but looking around, he'd wonder how he was going to get out of this. Damn it! He'd grab his other arm with his hand, pulling it together as he prepared to clasp his hands together, hoping against hope that he could somehow make it through this. Before he hit the ground, he'd slam his hands together, the two connecting as his energy would once again ignite. As he'd swap with a piece of rubble, that very stone would be enhanced by his momentum, flying down at his now broken body from above. Then she would run in time. Uraraka would slap the stone out of the air, clasping her hands together as it became weightless, barely even grazing him, as she then finally let it go as she pushed it off of Izuku. Both of them would be breathing heavily as the exam would finally be over, with Recovery Girl coming out and healing Izuku's wounds. Izuku would be fully recovered, but he would still feel a numbness in his arm and legs. That was a crazy amount of power. And there was something else there too. Something interacted between Boogie Woogie and One for All. I wonder how that even happened. Izuku would go home worried that he hadn't gained enough points, but thankful that he had managed to save that girl, even if she had to save him again at the end. And finally, a few weeks later, a letter would come in the mail, Izuku's mom running into the room. "Izuku dear, you got a letter from UA." He'd gulp, grabbing the letter as he'd rip it open. In his room, the hologram would appear. And there he stood. All Might would have let Izuku know that he had made it into UA, and he even scored the top amount of points in the year, saying he had actually received extra points for saving a fellow classmate, and that the girl had even gone to tell the committee that he had saved her and asked if he could gain some extra points from hers, due to her own inability to escape the situation, and how that boy had chosen to save her instead of prioritizing his points. She thought that was pretty heroic. Izuku would blush and cover his face.
Oh, this is almost as embarrassing as that time I talked about Jennifer Lawrence.
What did you say?
What? This is on audio call?
Ha, just kidding. This is a recording.
Oh, whew. Almost scared me.
Izuku was congratulated on getting into UA, and with that, his first day of school would rapidly approach. With his uniform in, The time had finally come. As he walked into the school gates, making his way toward Class 1A, the class he had been assigned as a hero course member, he gulped with pride. I'm finally here. After all of that work. All Might, purple shirt guy, we did it. He'd opened the giant door, wondering why it's so huge. As he'd finally run into his new classmates, he'd see Ida, the guy with the speed quirk, who he had unfortunately used as a victim during the exam, would be preoccupied with harassing Bakugo Katsuki, Kachan, who had his feet up on the desk.
This is a place of learning. I will not have you sully our location with your manners.
Who died and made you king?
How dare you? I do not believe in a rulership system like that to begin with.
He'd see another kid with half red and half white hair, and the scar on his red side would remind Izuku of the man who had saved him, of Purple Shirt Guy. It was then finally that Ochako Uraraka would arrive, saying,
Hey, you're the kid who saved me. Thanks. I'm so glad you got in. I was really worried about your points after that. So what's your deal? Do you have super speed or something? Did you grab me and pull me out and then somehow get back under the foot? Or what was the whole deal with that? It was crazy. Because then you went like kaposh and then it went like bah. Wow, a girl's talking to me.
Izuku's thoughts would be interrupted by a strange caterpillar-like creature which would cause him to scream out. The yellow creature would reveal itself as their homeroom teacher, Aizawa. Mina, Kaminari, Kirishima, and Mineta and the others, Koji and everyone else, would take their seats, with the strange man pulling up his yellow sleeping bag and pulling out the gym clothes with the sizes of all of the students. Before Izuku could think about that for too long, the man would say, All right, brats, put these on. We're gonna go skip orientation today.
What? But we're all supposed to go.
Yeah, I know. I'm not a very good teacher, okay? I do things that I want. Whenever I want.
Well, that's super creepy. Why does he have all of our sizes? Sure.
With that, the rest of the class, including Izuku, would head outside, changing into their slightly filthy gym clothes. They would have a weird smell to them. Oh well, best not to think of it too much. As Izuku and the others would begin, they would have their training test, with everyone needing to prove their strength, and the bottom, the weak, would be culled. With this announcement, Izuku would gulp. Another test determining if he could even stay here already? Well, he'd give it his all. For most of the events, Izuku couldn't really do anything. For example, the running event. He couldn't switch with another participant, and unless he had an item, he couldn't use Boogie Woogie to get to the end super quick. So how was he supposed to move faster? Should he have used One for All? Well, with his base strength from the beach training, he wasn't in the bottom, but still, it was nothing impressive. Bakugo would scoff.
Of course you're gonna be an average loser nobody. I guess this is where they kick you out, huh, Deku? I had nothing to worry about,
he'd say smugly. Izuku would hold his tongue. I'm gonna score really high on some of these later events. And he was right. For example, one of the students, actually being Mineta, would place down his own quirk, creating these small purple balls and using them to bounce between to get an extremely high score on the side-to-side jump exam. And no one could touch them because he'd show that when anyone besides him touches them, they'd be stuck to it, while he could bounce off of them, instead being repelled. Izuku would ask to use the same station that Mineta had used, and to everyone's shock, he'd smirk, not being stuck at all. He'd use his Boogie Woogie to switch between himself and the two other stations, moving so quickly it looked like he was using super speed or something. He'd simply be clapping his hands rapidly, jumping between faster than he could physically jump, and getting a super high score, already securing him out of the bottom. Ida and Uraraka would be shocked, wondering what kind of quirk he had. Seriously, after all that physical power he displayed, was this something else? How did it work? Izuku would finally stop, breathing a sigh of relief as his hands would be covered in sweat, feeling warm from clapping so much. He would have gotten a super high score, only being beaten out by Mineta himself. And finally, after all these events, the final event would come, the ball toss. Eraserhead would explain that they're able to use their quirks freely here, unlike in middle school, asking Katsuki Bakugo what his regular score was. About 67 meters. Well, use your quirk this time. With his explosion quirk, Bakugo would launch the ball a massive 705.2 meters. Izuku would be impressed. That's so far. The only one who would be even higher than him would be Uraraka, who with her zero gravity quirk would get an infinite score, the ball soaring into the atmosphere and going into space, being the by far highest score that anyone had gotten during any of the apprehension tests. The time had finally come for Izuku's turn. I guess I should try using One for All here. He'd focus his energy into his fingertip, planning only to throw the ball using just the bare minimum of his power, channeling One for All. But something strange would happen. He'd feel the blue energy that he uses when he uses Boogie Woogie flow with One for All, and it would cover the ball in energy. As Izuku was about to throw, Eraserhead would use his quirk, nullifying One for All. But the ball would still go. Pretty far, even. The score would show up as about 120 meters, which was about 3 times what Izuku had said his base throw was back in middle school, about 44 meters. Aizawa would raise an eyebrow. He's that physically strong without his quirk? He'd have the same lecture and tried to wrap Izuku up again using his scarf, saying that he's not going to train any jokers. As Izuku would be getting wrapped up, he'd smile at Aizawa. You think this is enough to stop me? I'm not leaving no matter what. I worked hard to get here. Wrapped up tightly, he'd barely clasp his hands together and activate Boogie Woogie. The class would be shocked. His eyes would widen as Aizawa realized, falling over, that he was wrapped in his own scarf. Izuku would stand there, the scarf wrapped around his neck, having swapped with Eraserhead. Aizawa could only wonder, when did he? But it was too late. He was caught in his own web. He couldn't even move a muscle. The rest of the class would gasp in surprise. Izuku would turn, pointing a finger down at their homeroom teacher. I don't care what your preconceptions of me are. If you try to interfere and take me down, then I'll fight back with all I've got. At this last word, he looked back up to Bakugo, who grit his teeth, feeling challenged by this useless Deku. Izuku would walk over and untie Aizawa, who would quickly pull his scarf back to him, looking both fearful and confused, but above all, he was irritated. Some student, someone of this age, was able to get the jump on him? A pro? I gotta keep an eye on this one. He still had no idea how Izuku had managed to swap with him. He had been staring at him the whole time. Was that a mutation type quirk? Or a base physical ability? That doesn't make any sense though. I was certain he was a stock type. Aizawa would cough out, saying that due to him losing on this one, he'd look annoyed at Izuku. We'd call it even. Everyone passes today. You all did well. Class is dismissed. With that, Aizawa would go have his conversation with All Might, and Izuku would begin packing up and heading home, when he'd be bumped into by 2 people from his class, Ochako Uraraka and Tenya Ida. They both begin complimenting him, saying how well he did out there, and that he did awesome when he kicked that teacher's butt. Neither of them had ever seen a pro hero be surprised like that before. He was awesome. Izuku would blush, scratching his cheek. Thanks guys. By the way, Uraraka would ask, is Deku like your name or something? Or maybe a nickname? Anyway, it sounds cool. Would make a great hero name. You think so? I was thinking something like Switcheroo, but maybe Deku is better. And with that, Izuku's first day as a student at UA would come to an end. Thank you guys so much for listening to Part 1 for What If Izuku Had Boogie Woogie. If you guys want to see more, make sure to, slap all those cool looking buttons down there. And I appreciate each and every one of you for staying here and for enjoying the story. If you guys want a part 2, I'm looking for about 200, 300 likes, something like that. And we'll get a part 2 going because this is super fun to write. And I like the power. It's not like a crazy ability, but it's just such a smart, high IQ ability that just gels with Deku's personality really well. Anyway, not Boogie Woogie, but point being, guys, I had a blast. If you guys want part 2, you know what to do. And I'll see you all next time. Adios.